Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. For our first topic, which is the role of financial markets and institutions, we start with living blueprint. The phrase living blueprint is deliberately chosen. A blueprint, uh, in the traditional sense, is a static plan, which is fixed, drawn once, and filed away. But the financial system is anything but static. It shifts in response to policy decisions, technological disruption, investor psychology, and global shocks. The word living here signals that what students are about to study is not a museum exhibit of how finance used to work, but a dynamic architecture that is actively changing around them. The subtitle Mapping the 2026 Financial Ecosystem grounds the presentation in a specific moment. This is not a generic overview. It is an attempt to describe how financial markets and institutions function right now in early 2036 with all the particularities of this moment. The aftermath of COVID-19, a global tariff shock still echoing through supply chains, AI investment boom that has reshaped market concentration, the latest uh, war between the Israel, USA, and Iran, and a Malaysian financial system that is executing one of the most ambitious capital market expansion plans in the region. The isometric city illustration here reinforces this idea of financial infrastructure as something built, interconnected, and layered. Perhaps the single most distinctive feature of Malaysia's financial system is dual structure. On the left stands the conventional financial system, consists of commercial banking, derivatives, fixed income, asset management, and data infrastructure. On the right stands the Islamic financial system, Sukuk issuance, Islamic banking, Islamic funds, Takaful, which is Islamic insurance. These are not two entirely separate worlds. They share regulators, they compete for the same customers, and they often sit under the same corporate roof. But they operate on fundamentally different principles. Conventional finance charges interest, while Islamic finance shares risk and profit. The numbers here matter. The total capital market stands at 4.3 trillion ringgit as of 2025, and the Islamic capital market constitutes 64% of that, roughly around 2.7 trillion ringgit. That is not a niche, it is the majority. Malaysia has topped the Islamic Finance Development Indicator for 13 consecutive years, making it the undisputed global leader in this space. The bridge at the bottom connecting the two towers is labeled with the Master Regulators Bank Negara Malaysia, for Malaysia, meaning for banking and insurance, and the Securities Commission Malaysia or SC for the capital market in Malaysia. They regulate both systems in parallel, ensuring coherence and stability across the dual structure. Here is the most fundamental concept in all of financial economics, presented as a visual loop. Money flows from surplus units, people and institutions that have more than they need, okay, to deficit units, which are people and institutions that need more than they have. Surplus units are typically households and institutional investors, while deficit units are corporations and government. The transfer happens through securities. For example, surplus units hand over funds, and in return, they receive financial instruments such as bonds, shares, or sukuk that represent a claim on the deficit unit's future income or assets. What makes this slide effective is the two examples anchoring the abstraction. On the left, the EPF is deploying 1.41 trillion ringgit in assets, which are the retirement savings of 18.1 million Malaysians, making it one of the most consequential surplus units in Asia. On the right, a Malaysian corporation seeking funds for AI infrastructure extension represents the deficit unit. Between them sit the intermediaries and markets, which are the banks, the exchanges, the fund managers, and the regulators. Without the middle layer, the EPF would have to individually evaluate every company it lends to, and the corporation would have to knock on millions of doors to raise capital. The intermediary layer is what makes the whole system scalable. There are two things that students sometimes conflate: primary markets and secondary markets. They are connected, but they serve different purposes and operate on different mechanics. The primary market is where new securities come into existence. An IPO on Bursa Malaysia's main or its market, for example. A fresh sukuk issuance by a government-linked company or a government bond auction. That's another two examples. Here, the corporation or government receives capital directly from investors. This is the point where real economic financing occurs. That is where money actually reaches the entity that will use it to build something, hire people, or fund public services. The secondary market is where those securities trade hands afterward. The corporation does not receive any additional money when its shares change owners on the exchange, for example. So why does the secondary market matter? The answer is liquidity. The gauge between the two stages in the illustration represents this concept. Liquidity determines whether a security can be sold without a substantial loss of value. And here is the crucial insight. Without a liquid secondary market, the primary market would struggle to function. Investors would demand steep discounts on new issues if they feared being locked into an illiquid position. The secondary market's existence gives investors confidence that they can exit, which paradoxically makes them more willing to enter in the first place. Securities are organized into three tiers based on their time horizon: underlying value and risk profile, visualized as a layered pyramid. At the base sits the money market. Here, short-term, high liquidity debt instruments maturing within 1 year. This is the plumbing of the financial system, where banks manage overnight cash provisions, where governments fund short-term gaps, and corporations park idle money. In Malaysia, the overnight policy rate OPR was held at 3% in 2024 before Bank Negara Malaysia cut it to 2.75% in July 2025 as a preemptive response to the global tariff shock. The Rentas system, Malaysia's real-time electronic settlement infrastructure, processed 73.63 billion ringgit in transactions in 2024, a figure roughly 45 times the country's GDP. That volume speaks to how active and essential the money market layer is. The middle tier is the capital market for long-term debt and equity. This is where the big financing happens. For example, Malaysian government securities, MGS, corporate bonds, and sukuk, equities listed on Bursa Malaysia with a market capitalization of approximately 1.95 trillion ringgit. This is the layer that funds infrastructure, corporate expansion, housing, and government operations over years and decades. At the top, sit derivatives, contracts whose value derives from underlying assets. Derivatives serve two purposes, speculation and hedging, that is, risk management. Here, we highlight Bursa Malaysia derivatives and the crude palm oil futures contract, which serves as the global benchmark for palm oil pricing. As example, Malaysia is one of the world's largest palm oil producers, and the FCPO, or crude palm oil futures contract, is arguably the single most internationally significant financial instrument that originates from the Malaysian market. Here we can see the sharpest possible line between the two fundamental categories of securities. Okay, debt and equity. Debt and equity are not just different products. They represent different legal relationships, different risk structures, and different claims on a firm's value. Debt securities are borrowed funds. The issuer promises to repay principal plus interest on a defined schedule. The return is contractually guaranteed. In bankruptcy, debt holders have priority over equity holders, meaning they get paid first from whatever assets remain. The meaning is clear. You are lending money and the borrower owes you. While equity securities represent ownership, there is no guaranteed return. Dividends are discretionary, dependent on the firm's profitability and the board's decision. The upside is unlimited. If the company tries, equity holders capture that growth, but the downside is total. In bankruptcy, equity holders are last in line, and they often receive nothing. In exchange for bearing that risk, equity holders receive voting right and a governance role that debt holders do not. The green box in the middle is significant. The sukuk exception. Sukuk look like bonds in many respects. They provide credit returns and return principal, but they are structured to avoid interest or riba. which is prohibited under Sharia law. Instead, sukuk returns are generated through asset-backed arrangements, profit sharing, or lease payments. Malaysia issues roughly one-third of all global sukuk, totaling 2.1 trillion ringgit in outstanding value. This is not a footnote to the debt equity discussion in the Malaysian context. It is central to it. This slide is about how securities get priced, and it tells the story in two halves that represent two different eras happening simultaneously. On the left is the classical approach. Here, investors gather information, for example, economic conditions, industry trends, firm-specific data from regulatory filings, or analyst forecast, and feed it into a discounted cash flow engine. The output is an intrinsic value estimate. What the security should be worth based on the present value of its expected future cash flows. This model has been the bedrock of investment analysis for decades, and it remains sound. For example, every CFA curriculum, every finance degree still teaches it. On the right, however, is what has changed. AI and machine learning systems now ingest satellite imagery, social media sentiment data, natural language processing of corporate filings, and high frequency pattern recognition to generate dynamic market insights at speeds no human can match. Here, it highlights RYP Bank, which is one of Malaysia's 5 newly licensed digital banks, launched in August 2025. This bank uses AI to auto-summarize quarterly earnings reports and identify chart patterns for retail investors in real time. A decade ago, those tools were available only to institutional trading desks. Now they are on a phone app. The banner at the bottom carries the most important message on this slide. Valuation is inherently uncertain. Information asymmetry and the unpredictability of future events mean that any valuation is an estimate, not a fact. At least not yet. Two competent analysts can look at the same company and arrive at different numbers. This uncertainty is not a bug in the system. It is why markets exist, why prices move, and why investors demand a risk premium. This slide is about what happens when human psychology gets involved. The upper chart is volatile, jet reactive. It represents retail investor behavior driven by the psychological biases that behavioral finance has identified. For example, herd behavior, loss aversion, and anchoring bias. The chart marks the April 2025 Liberation Day tariff shock, when the US administration announced sweeping reciprocal tariffs and the S&P 500 briefly entered bear market territory on an intraday basis. Because fear overwhelmed analysis, prices fell far faster than fundamentals justified. The lower chart is steady rising discipline. It represents institutional behavior. Specifically, the EPF's approach during the same period. The ETF, with its diversified global portfolio and multi-decade investment horizon, leverage the technique to buy assets at depressed prices. The CEO described it as participating in the recovery of equity markets post-Liberation Day. Because of that, the recovery generated strong Q3 2025 returns and contributed to the 6.15% dividend declared for the 2025 year. The contrast between the two charts here is the entire lesson of behavioral finance condensed into a single image. Discipline and time horizon are the antidote to psychological bias. This slide reframes the foreign exchange market as the connective tissue of global finance. Every cross-border transaction, whether a Malaysian electronics exporter selling to a US buyer or foreign institutional investor purchasing shares on the Malaysia, they ultimately requires a currency conversion. The FX market, or we call it as foreign exchange, facilitates that exchange. The centerpiece figure, $9.51 trillion in daily turnover, comes from the Bank of International Settlements April 2025 annual survey. That is not annual income. That is daily. It dwarfs every other financial market on earth by an enormous margin. The number is elevated partly because April 2025 coincided with the tariff-related volatility that drove unusually high trading activity. But the underlying trend is clear. Foreign exchange markets are growing, and emerging market currencies are growing fastest. Trading in emerging market currencies has expanded at more than double the pace of developed market currencies over the 3-year period to April 2025. The globe illustration here traces the financial connections between New York, London, Tokyo, and Kuala Lumpur. The side panel explains the two-age nature of national integration. It allows deficit units in one country to access surplus units in another, which is enormously valuable for economic growth. But it also transmits shocks at high speed. When US tariff policy shifted abruptly in April 2025, the impact reached Bursa Malaysia within hours. Integration is both an opportunity and a vulnerability. This is the bridge slide, quite literally. The illustration shows financial institutions as a bridge spanning a chasm of market imperfections between surplus units. For example, an individual with savings represented as stacked blocks, and deficit units, for example, a corporation represented as an industrial complex. The chasm represents the core problem that financial institutions exist to solve. Without intermediaries, a household with savings would have to evaluate on its own whether a particular corporation is creditworthy. Most households lack the expertise, the information, and also the skill to do this effectively. The labels on the bridge pillars identify the specific functions that intermediaries perform: pooling liquid deposit, so that many small savings can fund large loans, developing expertise in credit worthiness evaluation that no individual saver could replicate, diversifying risk across thousands of loans so that one borrower's default does not wipe out any single depositor, and providing loans of the exact size and maturity that deficit units need, which individual savers could never coordinate this on their own. The dark erase beneath the bridge is labeled with the market imperfection that make intimidation necessary. Information asymmetry, default risk, and illiquidity. These are not theoretical abstractions. They are the reason banks exist, the reason insurance companies exist, and the reason pension funds exist. Remove the bridge, and the two sides of the economy cannot connect. This slide is a reference table, and it is one of the most information dense in the deck. It maps every major class of financial institution against its primary source of funds and its primary use of those funds. The depository institutions, which consists of commercial banks, savings institutions, and credit unions, they all gather deposits, but they deploy them differently. Commercial banks, for example, purchase government and corporate securities and make loans to businesses and households. Savings institutions concentrate on mortgages and household loans. Credit unions lend to their members. Each serves a distinct niche. The non-depository institutions tell a different story. Finance companies do not take deposits at all. They raise funds by issuing their own securities, then lend the proceeds to households and small businesses. Mutual funds sell shares to investors and use the capital to buy diversified portfolios of long-term securities. Insurance companies collect premiums and invest them in long-term instruments. Pension funds accumulate employer and employee contributions and invest them, again, in long-term securities, until members retire and draw them down. The footnote at the bottom is critical for the Malaysian context. In Malaysia, every category possesses an Islamic counterpart, utilizing profit sharing or mudharabah rather than interest. This is not a cosmetic difference. It means that alongside every conventional bank, there is an Islamic banking equivalent. Alongside every conventional insurance company, there is a takaful operator. And alongside every conventional bond, there is a sukuk. The entire matrix effectively doubles in the Malaysian system. This slide captures the most consequential structural shift in Malaysian financial institutions in recent years. On the left is the traditional financial conglomerate, a holding company sitting atop commercial banking, thrift operations, consumer finance, mutual fund operations, securities operations, and insurance. Okay. Maybank Group, CIMB Group, RHB Banking Group. These are the incumbents that have dominated Malaysian finance for decades. On the right are the 5 digital banks licensed by Bank Negara Malaysia between 2022 and 2024, all of which became operational by August 2025. GX Bank, backed by Grab, the ride-hailing and payments giant. Boost Bank, a partnership between Axiata Group and RHB. Aeon Bank, Malaysia's first Islamic digital bank. KAF Digital Bank, the second Islamic digital bank, assembled from a consortium of fintech companies including Kasam and Moneymatch. And RYT Bank, previously YTLC Digital Bank, which brands itself as the world's first AI-powered bank. The text in the center captures the dual significance. These digital banks operate entirely online, targeting unbanked and undeserved communities, while simultaneously forcing rapid technological adaptation upon traditional conglomerates. They are not merely new competitors. They represent a different philosophy of banking. For example, mobile first, data-driven, and unburdened by branch networks and legacy infrastructure. Whether they will take meaningful market share from incumbents remains an open question. But their existence has already changed the competitive dynamics of the entire sector. This slide addresses a function of financial institutions that often receives less attention than it deserves. That is, their role as monitors of corporate governance. Insurance companies, pension funds, and large fund managers are not passive holders of equity. Because they own substantial stakes in publicly listed companies, they have both the incentive and the power to influence management behavior. In Malaysia, this monitoring role is concentrated in three institutional giants: the EPF, PNB, Permodalan Nasional Berhad, and KWAP, Kumpulan Wang Persaraan. Collectively, they hold significant positions in most KLCI component companies. The slide illustrates their governance activities: attending annual general meetings, voting on board appointments, engaging management on executive compensation, and exercising direct influence over corporate strategy. These are not ceremonial gestures. When the EPF or PNB votes against a board resolution, management pays attention. The call-out box provides the evidence. The Assist Public Listed Companies Transformation (PLCT) program shows that companies which are actively monitored and encouraged to improve their governance, strategy, and transparency achieve an average price-to-earnings ratio of 24 times, compared with 17 times for non-participants. That gap is substantial. It suggests that institutional monitoring does not merely enforce compliance. It creates value in a way that the market recognizes and prices. Systemic risk is the possibility that a problem at one institution or in one market cascades across the entire financial system, potentially causing a collapse. This slide visualizes it as a network of interconnected nodes, each representing a financial institution, with a central explosion radiating outward. When one node falls, the connections that normally enable efficiency become channels of contagion. The timeline on the right traces 4 episodes, each illustrating different mechanisms of systemic transmission. The 2008-2009 crisis was driven by mortgage defaults that destroyed the value of mortgage-backed securities used as collateral, which froze interbank lending because banks no longer trusted each other's balance sheets. The 2020 COVID-19 shock was a liquidity crisis. Asset prices fell so fast that margin calls and forced selling created a self-reinforcing spiral, producing the fastest equity crash in history before central banks intervened with unprecedented monetary easing. The 2023 US regional banking crisis demonstrated a new vector, social media-driven deposit runs, where rumors about Silicon Valley Bank's solvency spread on Twitter faster than regulators could respond, triggering a classic bank run at digital speed. And the 2025 Liberation Day tariff shock showed how policy uncertainty alone, without any institutional failure, can generate extreme intraday volatility when markets are already priced for optimism. The banner at the bottom summarizes the transmission mechanism in three phrases: sold securities, devalued collateral, and psychological panic. Those are the three channels through which local problems become global crises. Here we map the three Malaysian regulators that collectively design and maintain systemic resilience. The Securities Commission Malaysia, SC, focuses on capital market integrity. Its current priorities include mandatory climate-related reporting under the National Sustainability Reporting Framework, which began for large main market companies in 2025, with the rest following in 2026. It is also developing digital asset frameworks, working through the Capital Market Master Plan 2026 to 2020 to position Malaysia's capital market for the next phase of growth. Bank Negara Malaysia handles macro-prudential policy, stress testing above Basel III minimums and regulation of the dual banking system. Bank Negara Malaysia's oversight extends across commercial banks, Islamic banks, insurance companies, takaful operators, development financial institutions, payment systems, and the 5 newly operational digital banks. Its Digital Asset Innovation Hub, launched in June 2025, is currently piloting ringgit, pegged stablecoins, and tokenized deposits with institutions, including Standard Chartered, Maybank, and CIMB. PIDM, or Malaysia Deposit Insurance Corporation, provides deposit protection. The slide describes its focus as preventing social media-driven bank runs through guaranteed deposit protection, a framing that references the Silicon Valley Bank episode of 2023 and reflects the modern reality that deposit confidence must be maintained not just against traditional risk, but against the speed at which panic can spread through digital channels. The small box at the bottom left acknowledges the global baseline. The US Securities Commission and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act establish foundational standards for corporate accountability and financial disclosure that influence regulatory frameworks worldwide, including Malaysia. The final slide brings everything together under the banner of the Capital Market Master Plan 2026-2030, launched by Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim on 9 March 2026. It is both a summary and a forward-looking statement. The starting point is 4.3 trillion ringgit, the current size of Malaysia's capital market as of 2025. The destination is 6.3 trillion ringgit by 2030, representing a compound annual growth rate of 6 to 8%. The 4 pillars at the bottom supporting this expansion are named at the base of the
illustration. Vibrancy, that is deeper trading activity, higher valuations, more IPOs. Inclusivity, there is broader access to capital market products for all Malaysians, especially undeserved communities. Sustainability, that is climate-aligned financing, green suku ESG integration. And regional opportunities, that is cross-border expansion, foreign listings, leveraging Islamic finance leadership. The closing statement at the bottom right is the thesis of the entire presentation, condensed into 2 sentences. That is, when the architecture functions flawlessly, capital flows to its most productive users, funding the infrastructure of tomorrow while absorbing the risk of today. That is what every financial market, every institution, every regulation is ultimately trying to achieve. The gap between that idea and reality, we can say the market imperfections, the behavioral biases, the systemic risk, the regulatory challenges. These are the space within which finance operates. Understanding that gap is the purpose of this entire course.